On February 11th, 2012, Dhaka woke up to a nightmare. Two beloved journalists, Sagar Sarowar and Meherun Runi, were found brutally murdered inside their home. Both were respected, influential voices in Bangladesh's media landscape. Both were known for reporting truths that made powerful people uncomfortable. But the most chilling part? There were no signs of forced entry, no robbery, no weapon, no clear motive. It was as if someone had entered their home silently, completed the mission, and vanished without a trace. 12 years later, Bangladesh is still waiting for answers. Evidence disappeared. Statements changed. Suspects were arrested, released, swapped, rearranged like pieces on a board. Every promised investigation, from police to elite task forces, ended with the same message. We will solve it soon. But soon never came. Tonight on Dark Truth 25, we revisit this shocking double homicide, a case that shook the entire nation, yet somehow remains frozen in mystery and controversy. We will break down the timeline, examine the inconsistencies, expose the cracks in the investigation, and revisit the question no one has ever truly answered. Who killed Sagar and Runi? And why has the truth been buried? If you value deep investigative breakdowns, and if you believe stories like this should never be forgotten, please like the video, drop a comment, and share it so more people can engage with the truth. And if you're new here, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Your support keeps this channel alive and helps us tell stories that others avoid. Now, let's begin. The night Dhaka stopped breathing. The night of February 10th, 2012, began like any other for Sagar Sarowar and Meherun Runi, two of Bangladesh's most respected journalists. Their lives revolved around balancing high-pressure newsroom careers with raising their young son, Meg. Friends say they were exhausted but hopeful. A typical Friday night in Dhaka. Around 10 p.m., they returned home to their small apartment in West Rajabazar, a neighborhood known for its mix of middle-class families, students, and media professionals. It was the kind of place where neighbors recognized each other, where nothing truly unusual ever happened. But that illusion would not survive the night. As the city prepared for sleep, someone, or perhaps more than one person, was preparing for something far darker. The crime scene later revealed an eerie detail. No forced entry, no broken locks, no smashed windows, no noise heard by neighbors. Whoever entered their home did so quietly, like a ghost slipping through the cracks. Inside, the couple had settled in. Sagar checked emails. Runi prepared for the next day's assignments. They were familiar with late-night work. Journalism in Dhaka rarely slept. Between 1 a.m. and 2 a.m., something happened that transformed their apartment into a crime scene. We know from forensic reports that both were killed with sharp force injuries. The attack was brutal but controlled, efficient enough that investigators later speculated that the killer or killers had experience. Even more disturbing, their young son was sleeping in the next room, completely unharmed. This detail shook the nation. How could such violent murderers leave a child untouched? Were they deliberately sparing him? Or was he simply not part of the message? At dawn, a relative arrived at the apartment after repeated unanswered calls. He walked into the silent home, expecting the couple to be asleep. What he found instead derailed Bangladesh permanently. Their bodies, together, brutally murdered. No sign of robbery. Valuables untouched. The news spread through Dhaka like wildfire. Two respected journalists, executed inside their own home. The scenario seemed impossible. Cameras, reporters, police, politicians. Everyone rushed to the scene, as if the apartment itself held answers it refused to reveal. Within hours, the case became national news. Within days, it became a symbol. And within weeks, it became a deep wound in Bangladesh's criminal justice system. This was not just a murder. It was a challenge to the truth, to the system, to the country itself. Chapter 1 ends with a question that still haunts Dhaka more than a decade later. Who walked into that apartment that night? And who wanted two journalists silenced forever? Lives dedicated to truth. Before the night that shook Dhaka, Sagar Sarowar and Meherun Runi were more than just journalists. They were voices of accountability. Sagar, in his early 40s, was known for investigative reporting, often exposing corruption, administrative negligence, and political mismanagement. His colleagues described him as meticulous, relentless, and fearless. From municipal scandals to sensitive government operations, Sagar had a way of finding the truth that made him respected and, quietly, feared by some powerful people. Meherun Runi, equally dedicated, specialized in social issues, education, and human rights reporting. Her articles gave a platform to the voiceless and challenged the comfortable status quo. Together, the couple formed a team not only in life but in professional dedication, always fact-checking, always questioning. Neighbors and friends recalled their disciplined routines. Every evening, they would check the latest news, discuss the next day's stories, and often stay up late finalizing reports. Their home was both a sanctuary and a small newsroom, but it was these very qualities that made them targets. They had recently reported on politically sensitive topics, including alleged corruption in local authorities, and had received veiled threats in the months leading up to their deaths. Some colleagues mentioned that Sagar was particularly worried about his safety, though he never publicly shared the specifics. In this chapter, we explore their daily routines, the stories they were working on, the networks of sources they cultivated, the enemies they may have made along the way. We also examine the subtle warning signs that the journalists may have sensed danger, the unusual security precautions, the last-minute calls to family, and the quiet discussions about potential threats. By understanding their lives, the work, the relationships, and the pressures, we gain insight into why these two journalists became the center of one of Bangladesh's most perplexing murder cases. And yet, the deeper question lingers. Was their professional life the only motive? Or was something else lurking beneath the surface? The apartment of evidence and oversights. When the first police officers arrived at the Sarowar Runi apartment, they were confronted with a scene that would haunt Bangladesh for years. The apartment itself appeared normal from the outside. Doors locked, windows intact, a quiet residential building in West Rajabazar. But inside, chaos and precision collided in a disturbing tableau. The couple was found in their bedroom, bodies positioned in a way that suggested both struggle and control. There were no signs of forced entry, leading investigators to question whether the killer had a key, had been let in, or had mastered the art of silent entry. The valuables, laptops, phones, jewelry, were untouched, immediately ruling out robbery as the primary motive. Yet there were oddities. A phone unplugged, missing crucial call records, paperwork scattered on the desk, including incomplete drafts of investigative report signs that someone had been in the home recently, without leaving fingerprints in some areas. Investigators faced immediate challenges. The first forensic reports were contradictory. Some suggested that Sagar was struck first, while others indicated Runi. There were strange traces of blood smears that didn't match the killer's profile. The apartment seemed to have been partially staged, but why, and by whom, remained unclear. The child, Meg, who had been sleeping in the next room, became the key witness, though his recollections were fragmented and traumatically incomplete. Statements made to police at the time revealed inconsistencies. But these inconsistencies were understandable given his age and the shocking nature of the events. Media attention compounded the pressure. Within hours, cameras were filming outside the apartment. Interviews with neighbors circulated, and speculations ran wild. Who could have done this? Political enemies? Criminal networks? Personal grudges? Theories multiplied faster than evidence could be collected. This chapter dissects the crime scene in meticulous detail, evidence collected and lost, contradictions in initial police reports, what investigators immediately identified as potential leads, and what they ignored. By the end of this phase, the audience is left with a stark realization. The apartment contained answers, but the investigation, from the outset, would struggle to unlock them. Every misplaced item, every overlooked trace, and every rushed assumption became part of a narrative that still confounds investigators today. The suspects and the investigation maze. With the crime scene analyzed and initial evidence collected, Investigators immediately faced a tangled web of suspects. The first challenge: there were too many possible motives and too many potential perpetrators, and yet none could be immediately confirmed. Initial suspects included neighbors and acquaintances, some who had grievances against the couple, though none were violent enough to commit murder. Security personnel. Guards in the apartment building were questioned extensively. Their movements on the night of the crime raised some flags, but nothing concrete. Political and professional enemies. Sagar's investigative work exposed local corruption, and Runi's articles had irked influential figures. Could someone have orchestrated a precise hit to silence them both? Interviews and interrogations began immediately. Officers meticulously reconstructed timelines, noting inconsistencies and contradictions. But the deeper they dug, the more tangled the narrative became. Statements didn't align. Leads went cold. Crucial pieces of evidence disappeared, sometimes inexplicably. Key findings from this phase of the investigation included a mysterious, unidentified visitor spotted near the apartment hours before the murder, ambiguous fingerprints, and partial shoeprints conflicting neighbor accounts, some later retracted or forgotten. The investigation itself became a public spectacle. Media scrutiny, political pressure, and public outrage exerted constant influence. Police were forced to make quick arrests, only to release suspects when evidence didn't hold up in court. By the end of this chapter, the audience understands the frustration and complexity faced by law enforcement. Too many suspects, too little evidence, and a public demanding swift justice. Every potential lead seemed promising, yet ended in disappointment, a pattern that would haunt the investigation for years. The web of evidence and missed clues. By now, the investigation into the murders of Sagar Sarowar and Meherun Runi had entered a critical stage. What initially seemed like a straightforward crime scene had morphed into a complex web of evidence, leads, and dead ends. Forensic teams worked tirelessly, examining fingerprints, shoe prints, and digital footprints. Yet, inconsistencies in documentation and overlooked details slowed progress. Investigators were confronted with conflicting narratives. Neighbors' testimonies varied, timelines clashed, and the child's fragmented memories added both hope and confusion. Key evidence points examined in this chapter include digital records. Emails, call logs, and drafts of investigative reports suggested someone might have tampered with sensitive information. Physical traces. The partially staged apartment left questions about the sequence of events. Were some details intentional distractions? Witness accounts. Eyewitnesses reported shadows, suspicious activity, and unfamiliar faces around the building. Each lead required painstaking verification, yet none provided immediate resolution. Authorities also faced external pressures. The media spotlight was unrelenting. Political entities applied subtle influence, and the public demanded swift answers. These pressures sometimes caused investigators to rush, leading to further missed clues and procedural errors. In this chapter, we also explore how patterns of human behavior intersect with criminal investigation, how assumptions can misdirect inquiries, how incomplete evidence can create false narratives, how ordinary oversight can have extraordinary consequences. As the days turned into weeks, the investigation revealed both promise and frustration. Every clue uncovered seemed to open another layer of mystery, highlighting how a meticulously planned crime can outpace even the most skilled investigators. By the end of Chapter 5, the audience sees the magnitude of complexity in solving the case. Every lead was a double-edged sword. Every piece of evidence had potential significance. The truth, obscured by layers of misdirection, remained just out of reach. This chapter bridges the first 4 chapters, which focused on niche-specific context, into the universal challenges of investigation. A web of evidence, the constant struggle to discern fact from illusion, and the haunting reality that the smallest oversight can prolong justice indefinitely. Investigators in the shadows. As the investigation into the murders of Sagar Sarowar and Meherun Runi continued, a troubling reality emerged. The crime was far more sophisticated than initially thought. This was not a spur-of-the-moment attack. The precision, The timing and the lack of obvious motive suggested careful planning by someone with access, knowledge, and intent. From the earliest hours, law enforcement faced daunting challenges. Dhaka, a bustling city of over 8 million people, offered both anonymity and confusion. Every street, alley, and building became a potential source of clues. Yet the sheer volume of activity made tracking the true perpetrator nearly impossible. Key aspects explored in this chapter include: 1. Forensic investigation. Forensic teams meticulously examined every inch of the Sagar Runi apartment. Blood spatter analysis suggested a precise sequence of attacks, possibly planned to minimize noise. Fingerprint collection revealed traces of unidentified individuals, though some were later contaminated due to early mishandling of evidence. Investigators also noted digital anomalies, emails deleted from both journalists' accounts, and unexplained access to sensitive files on their laptops. 2. Witness accounts. Neighbors reported strange occurrences in the days leading up to the murders. Unfamiliar faces lingering near the building, subtle noises at odd hours, and, in one case, a fleeting shadow crossing the hallway. While no one could confirm seeing the killer enter or leave, these observations became critical puzzle pieces. 3. Suspects and motives. Investigators were forced to consider multiple angles. Professional retaliation against Sagar and Runi's investigative work, political or bureaucratic intimidation, personal vendettas, opportunistic criminal behavior. Yet each lead appeared incomplete. Many suspects had alibis or lacked concrete connection to the crime, leaving investigators frustrated and the public impatient. 4. Interagency challenges. Coordination between Dhaka Metropolitan Police, local law enforcement, and national investigative bodies proved difficult and sometimes counterproductive. Conflicting protocols, miscommunication, and bureaucratic delays slowed progress. Some evidence was mishandled or overlooked, forcing investigators to revisit crime scenes and re-interview witnesses repeatedly. 5. Media and public pressure. As the case gained national attention, journalists and social media users amplified every rumor, speculation, and minor development. While public scrutiny helped maintain momentum, it also created false leads and distractions, complicating the investigation further. 6. The unseen patterns. Analyzing the crime in hindsight, investigators began to notice subtle patterns. The timing of the murder coincided with a sensitive news cycle. The choice of location reflected knowledge of the couple's routines, and the selective targeting, leaving the child untouched, sparing valuables, suggested intent beyond violence. 7. Psychological insights. Criminal profilers were consulted to understand the mindset of the perpetrator. Was the killer meticulous, controlling, and calculating? Or was this a crime of passion disguised as professional precision? The profiles offered possible scenarios, yet none could fully account for every detail, leaving the mystery largely unresolved. By the end of Chapter 6, viewers understand that this murder was not just a crime, but a complex orchestration involving knowledge, intent, and careful planning. Each lead raised more questions than answers, and the investigative team, though skilled and determined, was operating in the shadows of a crime designed to obscure the truth. This chapter emphasizes the universal truth in complex criminal cases. The pursuit of justice is as much about patience and observation as it is about evidence, and even the most careful investigators can be outpaced by a calculated killer. Hidden motives and dark connections. By the time the investigation had reached Chapter 7 of its unfolding story, it was clear that the murders of Sagar Sarowar and Meherun Runi were more than a simple act of violence. The pattern suggested hidden motives and networks operating behind the scenes, connecting people, power, and secrets that few were willing to confront. 1. Investigative threads. The team worked tirelessly to connect the dots, focusing on 3 primary threads. Professional retaliation. Sagar and Runi had exposed local corruption and sensitive political dealings. Could someone have sought to silence them permanently? Personal connections. While no domestic disputes were evident, acquaintances and neighbors became a focus of scrutiny. Some had minor disagreements with the couple, but the level of violence indicated premeditation rather than impulsivity. Criminal networks. Some theories suggested the involvement of organized actors familiar with Dhaka's urban environment, capable of executing a calculated crime and evading immediate detection. 2. Uncovering patterns. Investigators noted subtle patterns that pointed to deliberate orchestration. Timing. The attack occurred late at night, when the building was quiet. Selective targeting. Only Sagar and Runi were harmed. Valuables and the child were untouched. Evidence manipulation. Digital devices were tampered with. Some physical traces appeared staged or removed. This combination of factors suggested someone well-informed, with a clear objective, and possibly with professional or political connections. 3. The role of witnesses. Witness accounts were pieced together to form a rough timeline. Small details: a car parked nearby, a shadow moving across the balcony, a delivery person whose recollections seemed inconsistent, all became potentially critical clues. Investigators realized that these seemingly minor observations, if interpreted correctly, could reveal the perpetrator's movements and method, but time, public scrutiny, and pressure created the risk of errors. 4. Media scrutiny. As news spread, journalists covering the story were met with both support and obstruction. Rumors circulated, some potentially misleading. Investigators had to navigate false narratives while keeping focus on authentic evidence. 5. Psychological insights. Criminal profiling continued, helping investigators understand who the killer might be. Based on crime scene analysis and motive theories, experts suggested high level of planning and foresight, knowledge of the couple's habits and routines, likely intent to create fear and exert control. Yet, despite these insights, the profile did not point to a single individual, leaving the investigation in a persistent state of uncertainty. 6. The impact of delays and errors. Repeated delays in evidence collection, minor procedural errors, and conflicting witness statements prolonged the investigation. Each misstep created gaps that allowed suspects and motives to remain hidden, keeping the truth elusive. 7. A growing sense of danger. By this stage, investigators realized that uncovering the truth was not only about solving a crime. It was about uncovering a network, understanding hidden influences, and acknowledging that powerful actors might have been involved. By the end of Chapter 7, the audience begins to see the web of connections and hidden motives behind this tragic event. This chapter emphasizes the universal truth in complex crimes. Violence rarely occurs in isolation. It often reflects deeper currents of power, secrecy, and unresolved conflicts. The unseen forces and complications. As the investigation into the murders of Sagar Sarowar and Meherun Runi progressed, it became increasingly clear that there were unseen forces complicating the search for justice. The case was no longer just about reconstructing events. It was about understanding who could manipulate, obstruct, or conceal the truth. 1. Institutional challenges. Investigators faced challenges beyond the crime scene. Coordination between law enforcement, forensic teams, and government agencies was inconsistent, and procedural delays left critical evidence vulnerable. Some documents went missing, others were mishandled. These obstacles made it difficult to maintain momentum. Investigators realized that solving this case required both tenacity and strategy, navigating not just facts but bureaucratic labyrinths. 2. Digital footprints. A closer examination of the couple's digital life revealed a trail of emails, encrypted files, and deleted messages. Some messages suggested threats or warnings, while others hinted at ongoing investigations that could have angered influential figures. The digital evidence introduced new questions. Who accessed the files, and when? Were the deletions accidental, deliberate, or orchestrated by someone else? Could the digital trail point to the perpetrator's identity? 3. Hidden connections. As the investigation unfolded, patterns began to suggest connections between the couple's work and powerful external influences. Political pressure from sensitive reporting possible interference from influential figures connected to corruption or misconduct links to individuals who could plan and execute the crime with precision. These connections raised a chilling realization. The killers may not have been acting alone. 4. Eyewitness anomalies. Eyewitness testimonies continued to be inconsistent. Some neighbors reported seeing unusual activity near the building. Others heard unexplained noises. Small contradictions. A vehicle in the wrong place, a fleeting figure on the balcony, hinted at someone deliberately misleading observers. Investigators had to weigh every account carefully, distinguishing fact from confusion, intentional misdirection, and human error. 5. The role of fear and silence. Fear permeated the investigation. Witnesses were reluctant to speak, either due to intimidation or concern for their own safety. Colleagues in journalism were wary of revisiting sensitive stories. This climate of fear created a wall of silence, complicating the search for truth. 6. Psychological implications. Profilers continued analyzing the case. The killers demonstrated control, planning, and precision, suggesting an individual or network that understood both the victims and the investigative process. The psychological signature indicated someone who wanted the crime to remain unresolved as long as possible. 7. The elusive truth. By the end of Chapter 8, the audience sees that the case is not just about what happened inside the apartment, but the broader forces that allowed the crime to persist unsolved. Deliberate obfuscation, bureaucratic inefficiencies, and fear-driven silence combined to create a mystery that extended far beyond the crime scene itself. This chapter emphasizes the universal lesson. Complex crimes often involve hidden networks, unseen influences, and obstacles that go beyond the immediate act of violence. The pursuit of justice requires patience, resilience, and a recognition that truth is often buried beneath layers of human complexity. Patterns, parallels, and unanswered questions. As the investigation into the murders of Sagar Sarowar and Meherun Runi entered its later stages, investigators began to recognize patterns that were as revealing as they were frustrating. This chapter explores how seemingly unrelated details, minor anomalies, and overlooked evidence created a complex puzzle, leaving the truth obscured. 1. Revisiting the crime scene. Forensic teams returned to the apartment repeatedly. Each revisit revealed nuances that had been missed, subtle blood spatter angles, fingerprints on surfaces initially thought clean, and the positioning of personal belongings that suggested deliberate staging. Even small details, the tilt of a chair, the placement of a laptop, or the direction of a partially open window, became clues that investigators analyzed for potential meaning. 2. Patterns in victims' lives. The investigators noticed recurring threads in Sagar and Runi's professional lives. Investigative journalism exposing corruption reports that angered political or business figures' relationships with sources who might have had secrets to protect. These patterns suggested that the murders were not random, but rather calculated, with knowledge of the couple's habits, routines, and networks. 3. Parallels with other crimes. Investigators compared the case to other unsolved murders of journalists or activists. Some similarities emerged. Precise timing of attacks, minimal disruption to the surrounding environment, selective targeting of individuals who posed a threat. By recognizing these parallels, authorities hoped to predict potential leads or suspects, though the challenge remained. Each case had unique factors that prevented straightforward conclusions. 4. Witness contradictions and memory gaps. Interviews with neighbors and colleagues yielded conflicting accounts. A shadowy figure reported by one witness was denied by another. A vehicle seen near the apartment had no registration record. Key conversations recalled by friends were sometimes inconsistent. These contradictions, combined with the passage of time, made timeline reconstruction difficult. Yet each discrepancy offered potential insight into the killer's movements or method. 5. Digital forensics. Recovered emails, deleted files, and phone logs continued to be analyzed. Patterns emerged suggesting that someone manipulated data to hide motives or contacts. Some messages hinted at warnings or threats ignored by the victims. Others suggested that the perpetrator knew investigative procedures, anticipating potential evidence collection. 6. The broader implications. As investigators pieced together what they could, they realized that this case was a microcosm of larger issues. Threats to journalists, institutional limitations, and law enforcement, the role of fear and silence in concealing truth. The murders of Sagar and Runi highlighted how justice could be delayed or obstructed when social, political, and criminal factors intersect. 7. The unanswered questions. By the end of Chapter 9, the audience is left with several unresolved questions. Who orchestrated the murders and why? Were there accomplices? And if so, how deeply were they involved? Which clues were intentionally misleading and which were genuine leads? This chapter emphasizes the universal challenge of complex crimes. Patterns can illuminate, but contradictions, hidden forces, and incomplete evidence keep the ultimate truth just out of reach. The search for justice and the lingering mystery. As the investigation into the murders of Sagar Sarowar and Meherun Runi reached its later stages, it became increasingly apparent that solving this case was as much about navigating human complexity as about uncovering evidence. The final chapter in this series of universal insights explores the pursuit of justice, the lessons learned, and the enduring mysteries that surround the crime. 1. Attempts at closure. Despite months and years of investigation, authorities struggled to bring concrete charges. Some suspects were interrogated multiple times, yet definitive links to the crime remained elusive. Forensic analysis, digital reconstruction, and eyewitness testimonies offered pieces of a puzzle that never fully aligned. Investigators learned that in cases with political, professional, or personal entanglements, closure is often delayed or incomplete. 2. The human element. Investigators, friends, family, and the public all grappled with the emotional weight of the case. Family members of Sagar and Runi lived with grief, uncertainty, and frustration. Colleagues and journalists faced fear of similar attacks. Investigators carried the burden of responsibility, aware that procedural mistakes could compromise justice. The story emphasizes that human factors, courage, fear, perseverance, and mistakes, are central to the investigation of complex crimes. 3. The role of the media. Media coverage, while critical for public awareness, also shaped perceptions of the case. Stories were interpreted, speculated upon, and sometimes sensationalized. Investigators had to navigate both fact and fiction, ensuring that the truth remained the priority amidst public pressure. 4. Lessons learned. Several lessons emerge from the case. Preparation and caution are key in investigative work. Minor oversights can have major consequences in solving crimes. Patterns of behavior often provide clues, but they may also mislead. Coordination among agencies is vital for timely and accurate conclusions. 5. Lingering mysteries. Even after exhaustive investigation, questions remain unanswered. Who ultimately orchestrated the murders? Were there additional collaborators or hidden motives? Which clues were intentionally misleading and which could have led to breakthroughs? These unanswered questions serve as a reminder that justice is often a continuous pursuit, and some truths may remain obscured indefinitely. 6. The broader impact. The murders of Sagar and Runi resonated beyond Dhaka, highlighting risks faced by investigative journalists, demonstrating the complexity of modern criminal investigations, inspiring reforms and discussions about journalist protection and investigative procedures. 7. Concluding reflections. By the end of this chapter, the audience sees that while some answers may be found, others remain buried, leaving an enduring mystery. The case serves as a profound reminder. Every crime has a ripple effect, touching lives, careers, and communities. This final chapter leaves viewers reflecting on the fragility of truth, the resilience of those seeking justice, and the intricate dance between evidence, human behavior, and mystery that defines complex criminal investigations. Sagar Sarowar and Meherun Runi, the case that shook Dhaka. As we conclude this chapter of Dhaka's haunting true crime story, we are left with lingering questions and sobering reflections. The murders of Sagar Sarowar and Meherun Runi remind us that justice is not always immediate, and the pursuit of truth is often fraught with obstacles, fear, and mystery. If this story has left you questioning, thinking, or even shocked, there's one thing you can do to help us keep uncovering stories like this. Like this video, share it with others who are fascinated by real cases, and comment below with your thoughts or theories. Every interaction helps the story reach more people and ensures that these victims are never forgotten. And don't forget to subscribe to Dark Truth 25. Your support fuels in-depth investigations into true crime stories from around the world. We welcome your input, criticism, and discussion because every perspective makes us stronger and every voice helps seek truth. Stay alert, stay curious, and remember, every unsolved case has a story that demands to be told.